Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fifth episode of Catching Up. Our guest today is super exciting. I'm very flattered that she's here, Jamie Kroeger. Am I saying it right? It's Kroeger, right?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I never know, right? I always think I'm saying it right, and then people are like, no. But I did check with you before, so I was just like, I'm pretty sure I said it right, but just double checking. Um, and a big, huge thank you to Ontario Arts Council for providing us the funding to do a better job at the recordings. And yeah, we're really excited to have Jamie here today. I'm not going to talk a lot about Jamie because I think her story is very fascinating and I want her to share it with you. But just give you a quick description or quick brief description. Jamie comes from a firefighting background, which I found fascinating. She's a nature lover, which is another thing I found in common with her. And she is teaching at the Arts University of Alberta, right?
Yeah.
Alberta University of Arts. I always get it wrong,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Well, we changed our name from ACAD to the Alberta University of the Arts, so
That's
everybody
why I
seems
get
to get
confused.
used to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So it's an honor to have you here. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited to see your beautiful work, hear about your story, and I find Jamie's work fascinating. I was introduced to Jamie not so long ago, and ever since, her work is brilliant. I find it very eccentric, very colorful, and definitely worthy of sharing with not only Canadians but the world. Hopefully, once this goes on to YouTube, then we can all share it. But yes, I'm going to pass on the microphone to you. I'm right here, but I'm going to turn my camera off, so I'm not going to be distracting you with all my facial expressions that I make during your presentation. Um, okay, please
Okay.
go ahead.
I'm just going to go through this
Yeah, and
screen.
I think oh yeah, we already tested it. Wait. Oh
Uh,
yes, working perfectly.
Okay. So you can just see the
Yes,
big green hole. Okay. All
yes.
right. Thank you, Pasha, for inviting me to be part of this. It's really nice to connect with all the jewelry folks from all over Canada. I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges in the art jewelry world is just how spread out we all are across this country.
It is.
Um, yeah, so it's great to be here and be able to talk about my work and sort of how it comes to be. I think that most outdoors people are probably more about or an experience rather than a thing. So it could seem a bit odd, I guess, to use objects as a way of conveying connection to the outdoors. And I'm definitely in favor of the experience, but I also have a very intense passion for the making process. And because of that, the result is usually an experience and an object. And we all know how objects hold a powerful space in our life. They function in a way that describes who we are and what we believe in a very exact moment. And of course, there's other ways to express this, but for me, there's something about those things that you can hold, wear, and touch that I really connect with. And the idea of an object as a storytelling device is a little more abstract and maybe not as exact as, somebody telling or verbally portraying a story. But I like that it allows the viewer to make up their own mind about what the artist is trying to express. And I
Mhm.
think that freedom is welcomed.
Amazing.
So I hope that over about the next 40 minutes, I'll be able to introduce myself, my work, and some of what has influenced what I do and motivates me to do more. Please feel free just to interrupt and ask questions or comment. Let's just address things as they pop into people's brains so that they don't get forgotten. As Pasha said, my name is Jamie Kroeger, and I am an art jeweler from Golden, British Columbia. And I've been here for about 25 years, but spent my childhood on a small farm in Saskatchewan. And then when I finished high school, I left the prairies and searched for something new and, a bit more vertical topography. So eventually found myself in BC. And if you've ever been here in Golden, you know it's not a fancy place, but it's very close to many national parks. And at that time, according to the books I was reading, that's where you went to find adventure. It ended up that weekends weren't enough for me, so I agreed to wear a Parks Canada uniform and do it full time. My background is actually in science, and about 20 years I graduated from an environmental science program and then later did more education to specialize in snow, specifically avalanche science and
Oh, wow.
fire ecology. And I guess that resulted in me spending most of my adult life outside. And that time was spent on the back of a horse, running chainsaw, or sitting in a snow profile hole where we would collect data for avalanche forecasting at Rogers Pass.
Wow.
I was employed with Parks Canada and Resource Conservation for about 17 years, and I worked in all capacities from building trails, firefighting, and fire lighting. I spent a summer chasing bears out of campgrounds and town sites, which sometimes reversed itself, and it was me being chased. I worked as an avalanche technician and finally finished my career with parks as a field technician on horseback for the purpose of collecting data in the backcountry. And it's these experiences and the way of learning or adapting through them that has really influenced my art and the way I approach it. When you grow up on a farm, a lot of learning is based on figuring things out for yourself, and it either goes well or it doesn't. And I think my artistic process follows a similar suit. I learned how to fall a tree by reading a book, the 1979 Fallers and Bucker's Handbook. I also just learned enamel by quite literally winging it. And because of this, my process often involves failure. And in my previous life in the outdoor industry, failure was never something I was allowed a lot of space for. Um, in that world, safety margins are narrower and you can't afford to fail. But in art, I found it can have positive results and it can lead to better objects, innovations, new materials, and new process. For the most part, trial and error is my main tactic. I strive to figure out new ways to enamel larger hollow form copper pieces, new ways to connect things once they are enameled, and new ways to keep things together while they are being enameled. So innovation and problem solving are really what keep me jazzed up about my art practice. In 2014, I left my winter position at Parks Canada and I went back to school to study art at the Alberta University of the Arts in Calgary, and it was called ACAD then. I had already been making jewelry for about 10 years, primarily being self-taught, but I was really keen to learn the proper ways to do it and just to be surrounded by other artists. I had a hard time adjusting from a science life to an art life. I once governed by a long list of rules and limits. My art really seemed to follow suit for quite a few years. I was quite dedicated to figuring out a way that explained science and data through art objects, ones that were very literal and precise. And I was concerned all the time about misrepresenting scientific data and truly believe that kind of limited my ability to creatively make for a while. And initially, I was quite literally using data to create jewelry inspired by the bears themselves and the GPS paths that they create as they move through the landscape. The image before this one was the human wildlife conflict crew. I think the name of that's changed since then. We
Right.
were installing a GPS collar on one of the local grizzly bears around Lake Louise. And by doing this, we could track its movements
Oh,
in an attempt to try and preserve the wildlife corridors in the mountain parks, um, where it could move freely without bumping into trains and highway traffic. And
right.
then we could make more plans for animal overpasses and keeping them safe. I looked a lot at overlapping landscapes and the effect that it had on wildlife habitat, often considering these places from other perspectives other than humans, so from birds or bears. I worked a lot within scientific boundaries and standard research methodologies. And I spent a lot of time trying to constantly justify or prove what I was doing. In science, and especially where I was working with parks, there always had to be a reason for doing things.
Yes.
One of my biggest aha moments was when I could move away from that notion and then just make art about how I interpret connection to and within landscape without this overwhelming fear of making wrong assumptions.
Jamie, there's also a question. I had this question too. This is also enamel, right?
Yeah.
This piece?
The top two, the colored layers are enamel, the rest is all silver.
Silver. And when you said winging it, is that also part of the self-taught sort of process that you had with the enamel? So you just got a kiln and tried it at home?
Yeah, I did a little experimenting at the school when I was a student,
Yeah.
but it wasn't being taught there formally. So
Okay.
I was just trying things out. I read Linda Dardy's book. I've read that
Okay.
in probably 20 times
Wow.
and a lot of sampling and just sort of figured things out. But I also, there's so many rules around enamel,
Yes.
um, and I just ignored it all. And I think
That's
that that
great.
sort of
That's
led to
awesome.
the style that I work in.
Yeah, that's great. Because I also, have very little experience with enameling, and I always wanted to continue on, but I was for that specific reason that I was like, it's so specific, and you have to be, the timing, the material, the portions, all that stuff. But now hearing this from you, I'm like, maybe maybe I should also break the rules. And it's great to hear that you're, just as you said, winging it and experimental, and you created such beautiful work from it.
Thank you. Yeah, just wing it, passion.
Right.
It's worth it.
I will take that advice. That's great. Perfect.
I came to realize over time, and especially during my master's work in Oslo, that my art doesn't need to be about data. I could finally talk about feelings, and that was avoided at parks for a long time. And it could provide visual, object-based narratives of moments, situations, and conditions that everyone experiences in the outdoors. So I tend to make jewelry and objects that hold some kind of nostalgic connection to the human, or to me anyway.
Yeah.
We all know that jewelry has been responsible for portraying value, sentiment, and tradition. And I feel that making objects in this context may be a viable way to portray the way that I feel about the outdoors. I often rely on materials and process to be key components of this storytelling process. And I choose carefully those that tend to recreate the condition, like tediousness or stress related to certain situations, and then set deadlines or goals that amplify these feelings. The story isn't always obvious, and I think that used to bother me a bit. But over time, I'm less worried about whether people understand the full extent of the piece. And stories about the outdoors have always evolved over time, where certain parts of it become exaggerated and certain understated. And I just sort of roll with that. I let people observe and experience the pieces in whatever way they absorb them. And work such as this collection, Spatial Variants, aims to integrate process to portray tasks and
Right.
duties of an average avalanche technician.
Yes.
So the meticulousness of digging a 4 meter deep snow profile, like in the previous photo, and examining crystal forms is replicated in this project by sewing beads onto felt forms, 3 beads at a time. Soldering the steel wire into three-dimensional forms, and anyone who's done this knows that you have to sort of adjust to the actions of the material. The
Yes.
steel is really easy to overheat and things shift and slump, and you just adjust your vision as you work through the construction. And this is really no different than moving through the mountains. You react to changing snow and weather, you put one foot in front of the other.
This is amazing. Honestly, listening to you and then looking at the work, because whenever I looked at your work, I found it it's very different than the work out there because it has a perfect balance between some sort of geometric forms and very natural, but it's chaos, but everything's working. So now hearing you talking about the story and where it comes from, it's making a lot more sense. And it's like I'm I don't know, sorry. I get very excited about this stuff. So
Thanks,
sorry.
Pasha.
No, it's
There is a lot of
fascinating.
chaos and there's a lot of
It
hope that everything works
But
most of the
it
time.
works. That's the beauty of it. It works because even that picture that you had on, I was just looking at it and I was like, I can stare at this for hours because there's so much happening. Yeah, this one. It's
Yeah,
beautiful. Every single piece is beautiful, but then overall, everything's working together. All the colors, the shapes, and as you said, what you're doing is very unpredictable. So things are shifting, but there's still that like order, which is very weird because it's not orderly, but everything's working very as in like in line and altogether it's a cohesive body of work. It's
thank
fascinating.
you.
Thank you. Sorry, I just had to burst my moment of excitement, of course.
I appreciate it. Um, do that whenever.
Yes. Will do.
Um, so when I left high school, or I didn't leave high school, I graduated and within months moved to New Zealand for a year. And that first trip, I didn't lit this desire to see places that I'd never thought I'd get to. I hadn't spent a ton of time away from Saskatchewan before that. And there was something about the unexpected and the problem solving, which, as you just suggested in that last collection, it's obvious there. But in these new places also that was really rewarding. And I've come to realize that these same challenges I face in travel are the ones that I seek to recreate and observe in my artwork. So travel, especially for outdoor sport, challenging terrain, or places that are just simply hard to get to, provides me with motivation and ideas to continue making. I've been very lucky to find work around the world through skiing. And when I can fit it in, I work with my husband on international trips with ski clients. And so far, I've been able to fit these trips in amongst art obligations and then just really use them to observe how different cultures connect with the space they spend time in. Travel tends to plop me into unfamiliar situations where you don't understand the language, you get lost, and you're pushed to do things you may be uncomfortable with. And there's time for major revelations and observations. And for me, this level of discomfort seems to be a starting point for exciting things and new ideas. I was very lucky to travel to Antarctica to ski with a group a few years ago. And we started at the southern tip of Argentina and then sailed across the Drake Passage to get there. Uh, Coming from Saskatchewan, I know absolutely nothing about sailing and was told that we had just sailed through a hurricane for 3 days,
Oh, wow.
which was obvious we were sailing through something bad because none of us didn't move far from our bunks and we just spent most of our time trying not to throw up. But we had a lot of time to think about what we were doing,
Right.
both the benefits and the impacts, and learn about traditions common to polar travel and observe our surroundings. And things like this are really what drive my work forward. I decided to apply to an MFA program in Oslo, Norway, and was lucky enough to get accepted. And while I was there, I discovered this guy named Arne Ness and his book, The Ecology of Wisdom. And Arne was a philosopher, environmentalist, mountaineer. And in his book, he discusses a lot of things, but what I took out of it was the state with which humans regard environmental ethics in that as a species, we don't deal well with being told what's right and what's wrong in the way that we interact with natural environments. And he believes, as I do, that in order for a greater understanding of cause and effect relationships, humans need to be convinced of just the pure potential of joy that lies within outdoor spaces and those interactions. And while this can be accomplished in many ways, I've always hoped that through art and experiencing everything else, we can question and examine the ways that society, culture, and individuals value the natural world.
I just want to make sure I just put his name in the chat for anybody who wants to look him up. Arne and then Naess, but that AE is I don't know how to.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
if you Google just A and then E,
Okay.
but I
Okay.
think traditionally it is the one that's connected.
And he's a philosopher, you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's fascinating. I'm gonna look him up.
Travel, it allows me to spend time outside, but it also offers the opportunity to explore traditional craft techniques in many of the places I visit. This is in Kashmir, and it is one of my absolute favorite places ever. And we had stopped to buy some food at a little shop. And when I walked back to outside of the shop, I could just hear this bam, bam, bam. And it was just a noise that I was so familiar with because I just come from the workshop in Oslo. And so I wandered around a little bit, and sure enough, there's people down in this little basement hammering out copper bowls in a wheel well of a
Wow.
car tire.
Yes.
And walking through the markets, and there's guys sitting on the dirt floor tinning copper pots, and just these experiences where people are making things in the non-traditional places. Like they don't have jewelers benches. They're just there doing it. It really gets me excited about the possibility of moving my practice outside and being able to work wherever. And that was actually one of my focuses while I was an artist in residence on Salt Spring Island this spring, which if we have time at the end, I'll show some stuff from
Yeah,
there.
would love to.
So ultimately, the things that I see when I'm away really tend to surface in my work again in some format or other another. It will take a while to realize it, and I'm only able to observe it after some time has passed. I often get asked about how I proceed with the work, and at times I will have a concept that I want to work with and then need to figure out the best way to portray that narrative. So, to try to make all the aspects meaningful to me, I rely on the characteristics of the material or the actions of the process to tell the story. This collection of work, minus 40 degrees Celsius Fahrenheit, it revolves around the moments we encounter while living and working in extremely cold temperatures. So growing up in Saskatchewan, and well, anyone in Canada really, we're no strangers to cold winter temps, and enamel on metal seemed to be a logical choice in that it could portray this fragility of soft looking surfaces when they freeze solid. If you think about going to start your car on a minus 40 morning and you go to sit on the seat and you sort of bounce off of it. But extreme temperatures make even the most durable objects freeze. And through this collection, I was hoping to portray that in a relatable way. So chainsaws blow apart when you're living in a wall tent and it's minus 25. The woolen mitts that you wear as a kid on a dummy string around your neck don't really stay that woolly when you're tossed outside to give your mom a few hours of peace. And toes are just never warm in ski boots, ever, ever.
I I can definitely agree with that one for sure. Ever. Yes.
Like personal deep freezes for your feet. At times, rather than letting the concept dictate the material and process, I have materials and I seek out a story to tell with them. I have always had a fascination with trail markers or way markers and how they are different all around the world. In the next series that I'll show, I looked at random wayfinding. So that's similar to where one relies on that you rely on when you're feeling lost or disoriented. So looking for trail markers, but relying on intuition and chance to get from point A to B. And these five very large rings are based loosely on the many times and places that I've been lost with the horses in the backcountry. So colored cotton embroidery, floss was randomly pulled out of a bag and then cross-stitched onto steel mesh in really no logical order. And this was meant to mimic moving in multiple directions or covering areas. And I tend to work with materials like this sometimes if I'm not in my studio or if I'm traveling, I'll take a bag full of something I can carry around and continue working on it while I'm not at home. The hollow steel forms are soldered together at random angles, and then I just let gravity dictate their shape with the heating process. Each finished piece resembles that familiar and comforting cairn with a flash of bright paint that indicates you're back on the trail and traveling in the right direction. This gallery, I showed this in Oslo. It was very wide open and it was only separated by these old standing timbers that I think just held the ceiling up. They're quite beautiful and reminded me of trees. So I put 5 rock cairns sporadically throughout the space, and each rock cairn had a ring tucked into it. And I was pretty happy with how it all turned out and how people could move through the work on their own. It was a bit of work to set it up because I didn't have a car in Oslo, and this is how you move 8 loads of rock across the city on a bus, multiple trips.
Nothing more reliable than IKEA bags.
Exactly. I think it's the most durable
It's
thing.
the most durable for artists. Every year at the craft shows, I only see blue and yellow IKEA bags everywhere.
Yeah, perfect. Oops. So I've always been interested in the tools and equipment of the outdoors, and initially it was an interest out of necessity. It allowed me to safely do the activities I love. During my first time at university in my 20s, I blew my entire monthly budget partying because that's what you do when you're 20. And I had to embarrassingly ask my parents for some extra money, not for food, but to buy climbing gear so that I could do this trip that I wanted to do with friends. I didn't really go too much into what it'd be used for because I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have given it to me if they knew it was to secure my carcass to a rock face. But I continued to explore it after the shapes and the the things you find on the MEC walls always fascinate me. And with a little push from my MFA supervisor, Sigurd, I started to look a lot more closely at the objects associated with the outdoors, both historic and current. There's some really great museums in Oslo that contain artifacts from polar exploration and the history of skiing. So I spent a lot of time there. And it didn't take a lot of research to see the correlation that's easily drawn between gear and jewelry. But what I needed to dig into was, what did it mean to me? Were these objects just a necessity of safety, or did they take on other functions that maybe related more to identity, spirituality, and superstition? The next few slides show the beginnings of this exploration, and I still continue with it today in a project that's loosely called Putting All Your Trust in a Small Piece of Metal. And that looks at metalsmithing and the wild array of items we trust our lives to in the outdoor world. When I was working as an avalanche technician, we were responsible for maintaining all of the weather stations in and around Rogers Pass. So on my first day, I was told by a supervisor that no matter what I did or where I went, I needed to carry this crescent wrench in my backpack in case it was needed for station maintenance. So not knowing anything and being totally new, this made sense at the moment. And until I eventually went to all the stations and realized that each one of them had a stash of all the required tools, including the crescent wrench, and that I had just been ski touring around with an extra couple of pounds in my backpack for no reason at all. So that and this pink object here is useless and extraneous as it was, and now held a level of superstition for me. So long as I had that wrench, I would stay safe and ready for anything. And it stayed in my pack for 5 years, and I still feel a bit weird when I'm skiing without it. But beyond superstition, equipment and components of gear still surface in my work as I find they illustrate a physical correlation between people and their level of comfort in the outdoors. The textures of down jackets, the freshly fabricated teeth of a new cam that grips the crack of a rock and catches a fall, and that familiar feeling of rope sliding through your hands when you belay. They all create comfort and grow sentiment between the human and the outdoors. And perhaps this might just lend to fostering a sense of responsibility to the natural landscape and wild spaces. The time we spend caring for and training with our equipment could easily equate to the time we spend caring for wild spaces and the components that compose them. When I returned to Canada, I was still enthralled with all the gear, but I was also surprised at how I looked at things differently. And I could find interest in pattern from ordinary scenes, like this preseason lineup of chairs that were ready to be loaded onto the chairlift at Kicking Horse. To me, they almost seemed like people lining up for their turn to head up the mountain. Common trail maintenance tools took on the persona of trophies, especially when displayed in honor on the side of the maintenance shack. And the rakes and axes that were broken obviously held a story that has likely been told 1,000 times. And it got me thinking about work and the mundane nature of much that surrounds it. Work seems to be one of those things, those actions and necessities that you plug your way through, sometimes despising every minute of it, often not seeing the value or reward until many years later. In the case of work like that accomplished with these particular tools, there's the potential of instilling a personal value to nature within the worker because of the experiences the person and the equipment create together. Mentorship and coming to know what we know. I think I'd be remiss not to mention how much I think about learning and also how I pass on my knowledge now that I find myself in this teaching position at AU Arts. I'm a firm believer that you can and should attain knowledge in a variety of ways, and that there are many valid methods of becoming educated that don't always mean spending time at a university. And many of the most valuable learning moments in my life came from mentors and storytelling. And you won't know what to do when your horses take off in the middle of the night, nowhere to be found in the morning. But with a good mentor, you can be trusted to figure out how to find them. And you can listen carefully enough to the stories about where the grass grows its greenest and then realize that's probably where they've gone to feed. And that's what I feel the value of having. There's that is the value of having a mentor or a teacher. You can tell a metalsmithing student how to raise a vessel from flat sheet and draw out all the diagrams on the whiteboard, show them 100 examples, but they won't truly understand what's happening until they feel the hammer connect with the metal at just the right angle so that it lays tight to the stake below. And they need that time to explore that and feel it for themselves. I've been very fortunate to have many mentors that took the time to share their knowledge and their stories. And that's allowed me to get better at what I do and make more informed decisions, whether that's making rings that look like coffee mugs from warden cabins or nailing shoes back on horses. So storytelling is a huge part of how I learn and teach, and through my art, I've developed ways to do it visually and verbally. This is some of the work that I presented in Clarissa's exhibition in Vancouver a couple years ago, called The Maker's Mark.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was a
I never got to see the exhibition,
me
but
neither, unfortunately, but I've seen some of the pieces. It was a really good exhibition.
yeah,
Very good.
I was honored to be one of the people there. There's a lot of talented folks. Objects as stories. So a big part of living in the backcountry is being self-sufficient, and you pack in what you need, collect water from the creek or spring, make your own plan and solve your own problems. And at many of the warden cabins where I basically lived for a while, the water source is a little further away. And on the front porch of the cabin, you'll find this water hauling yoke. And it's this cumbersome wooden collar with long chains and hooks, and you hang the water buckets on it. So when you arrive at a cabin, you just set the horses out, and I would go in and trade my cowboy boots for a set of men's size 12 rubber boots because I guess historically it was always men with large feet that worked back there. And then I grab the buckets and yoke and flop my way out to the water hole. And the general idea of the yoke is to wear it around the neck, and then you hang the buckets off the chains to take the weight off your arms. And I appreciate the idea of this, but have my own love-hate relationship with this device. The chain bucket combo was always just a little too long for my short body and my tall size 12 boots. And then within 20 feet of the water hole, the majority of the water would be found pouring into my boots. So I'd have to return and do a follow-up trip back to the hole. This story, it won't relate directly to everyone, but the idea that an object can hold sentimental, frustrating value likely does. And we continue to use things even when we know what the outcome will be. Like jewelry, wearing it becomes a tradition, leaving the yoke on the doorstep for the next generation of folks working in the backcountry could be akin to passing down a wedding ring that's been in the family for generations. Stories have been told through object for a long time. If you consider that wall of trophies, each represents a winning or extraordinary moment in time. Sometimes it takes a while to have a winning moment and you get fed up with that and you just make your own trophy for finally catching a fish on the fly rod. Other pieces tell a story that isn't so obvious. So I think back to the firefighting times and our current situation in BC. And each year the fire season gets longer and more stressful. And I wanted to make a piece that portrayed this narrative and the effect of it on the key components of the fire system. The neck piece is composed of hollow form steel links and hand carved wooden links from a log that I found in my backyard. The connecting clasp is hollow fabricated enameled copper with a painted steel pin. This piece took an exceptionally long amount of time to make, and each part of it evolving through the process, much like the way we as humans understand, work, and respect wildfire, given the situation we're in now. And I wanted this piece to act as an object that illustrates this meshing of humans and nature and the realization that we need to act and adjust our expectations when dealing with situations that are too dangerous to control. The rusting of the steel links and the marks that the charred wood leave on the wearer, I like to think speak to the long-term toll it takes on people making tough decisions during these hazardous fire seasons. Other work that I make quite literally just speaks to fun and the joy we find with in play in the mountains. Skiing makes me happy and art makes me happy, and I just think life's the best when you can combine the two. This piece is called Cinch, and it visually and literally recalls the tale of the barfing bear of the Cyclone Warden District using traditional processes like embroidery and weaving in addition to enamel work. While pieces like Linked 1 and 2 consider the influences of colleagues when working in close quarters and the invaluable impact that they have on the way you consider artwork and continue to make things. Some of my more recent work looks again to tools and symbols associated with our changing relationship to forest systems. Never can I remember where we spent so much time in the spring and summer glued to the weather station or monitoring fire. In many places, living near the forest or in it was highly sought after, and now in many cases, it has generated fear and stress. This work is in Finland right now at Koru exhibition at the Forestry Museum.
And these are also enamel too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I took a chain from an old chainsaw that I had, but then the rest of the piece is completely fabricated with copper and enamel.
Lovely. Love the colors.
Thanks. These pieces, this one, Disturbance, and then there's another one that I actually just finished today. Look at some of the factors contributing to this uneasiness that many people in BC and many other places are experiencing at the time, at the moment. And then as a continuation to that project that examines this relationship to forests, I've been working on a collaborative project with my colleague, Mackenzie Kelly Frere. And this fire season, also known as spring and summer and parts of fall here in BC, felt different for me. Even with years of experience in the field, the events of this summer felt personal. Parts of Jasper burnt, and then a few days later, Golden was very close to dealing with the same thing. And dealing with all the feels from those events and seeing how scared people were made me realize that I needed to make more work, about this. And fireweed is the first plant that grows after an area is burnt, and it's often seen as a symbol of resilience. And seems like at the moment there are many people that rely on the resurgence of this plant as a symbol of closure and reassurance. And working with fire has changed. Even since I was a firefighter, dealing with these situations requires multiple agencies and community support, which, in a weird sort of turn of events, I think has actually made communities stronger despite all the stress and devastation. And I think this project is acknowledging some of the positives that come out of big fire events, and it looks to the expertise of others and the sharing of skills. So it has started out, Mackenzie is a fiber artist and a wizard of a fiber artist, and he figured out a way to spin the cordage I need to attach the pieces to my body using the fibers from the stem of cured fireweed plants that I harvested in a cut block by Golden. And then I've been building an interpretation of the fireweed blossoms in copper. One is in copper and enamel, and the other is in steel. And I can show you them once the presentation
This
is
is
done.
fascinating. I love this.
Thanks.
Great.
It's really fun. It's quite different from how I normally work, but I was loving every minute of it.
Yeah.
It's like magic. And then I guess I'll just finish. I sort of alluded earlier about this residency I did, but I wanted to show you a few photos from that. I was lucky enough to be the Salt Spring Arts Council resident artist in residence for 6 weeks on the island. And I made some new work, hung out and made art with some great kids at the Fulford Elementary School, and then met a ton of amazing people who live and create work on this beautiful island. I had a little cabin to live in. It was very similar to the Warden cabins, only way nicer. And then there was this amazing barn to set up a little studio space in, which is what the image from the left side is. It wasn't a traditional jewelry workshop, so I turned the table into a little bench and then just spread out. I did a lot of work just on the stumps out at the woodshed and, just working with the environment that I was put in. Because I didn't have the whole onslaught of jewelry tools, I worked a lot with textiles and beads. And so this combination of fiber techniques and small fabrication, lent to some sort of different pieces coming from me. I thought a lot about what it was like to be a visitor in a place and then looked a lot to the landscape for ideas and inspiration. In the spring, that little island is such an alive place. I would just spend, I accidentally spent an hour just sitting and staring, and it felt like you could watch things just grow up around you, things like fungus on stumps. layers of shapes and texture growing off and onto each other. Tools and organisms seem to sort of mesh and become one, figuratively and literally, as the plants just sort of overtake everything. And the patinas of the built environment evolve and adapt just as quickly as the plants and animals that make that place home. It was such a great experience, and hopefully I can get back there at some point to visit again. And that's the presentation.
That was honestly fun. I enjoyed every second of it. And you're a good storyteller.
Thanks.
You touched on something, well, a few things that I personally really appreciated. Talking about failure, which is something that often people don't talk about, but this field is all about failing and then getting right back up. I always tell our students that if you don't fall like this, you're doing something wrong. If you're not failing at often points. And then um, mentorship, I think that's another thing that is extremely important. I would not have been able to do it without my mentors. And I don't think I was just thinking about it while you were talking. I don't think we ever had that conversation with my mentors that they're going to mentor me, but it's just through, the relationship and me going to them and then they'll kind of taking me in. And I have a few of them in different fields, right? It's very like honestly, I don't know if I could have lasted without my mentors. And it's something that um I find it's a little bit overlooked nowadays.
Yeah,
But it's absolutely essential, I think.
I agree. Well, and to have multiple mentors so that you have a variety of voices
Exactly.
that you can draw influence from and experience from. And I think in this field too, mentors that are okay with failure,
Yeah,
that kind of promote it, because you're absolutely right. You need to have those experiences where things don't work out in order to learn from them. And I mean, there's a lot of jewelry in the world, so what we may call failures could be the big turning point in
exactly.
how the development of new techniques and new materials.
That's
That's, I think,
it.
where we're at.
Exactly. Sometimes through these failures, something great comes out. And I think often like I've had multiple times where there was happy accidents where I was like, oh, like this didn't work on this project, but maybe I can make a whole new entire collection out of something that melted or didn't work out, or a patina that didn't turn out exactly the way I wanted it. You learn, right? It's a matter of how you're gonna look at the situation because rejection, failure, all of that's gonna come in no matter what field. But also makes you learn a lot more. Problem solving. I always say if you go camping with a goldsmith, you're set because they're the best problem solvers. Literally.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
You always
you
come up
have
with
to be.
something like whether like I whenever I noticed this going with my friends that have camped for years, sometimes they would be so like stressed out about a very simple problem that it'd be like, oh yeah, just do this. Like I don't know. I don't remember an exact story, but there was moments where I was and they were like, oh. And I was like, yeah, like this is what we do on a daily basis. Like we just have to come up with problem solving techniques and issues that make life easier or speeds up a process or make something better or all that. So I think it's very, I appreciate that you talked about that. It's always good
They,
to hear that people actually do learn and survive on their failures. And it shouldn't be regarded as something negative and bad. Um,
no. One of the biggest, like my goal as a teacher, or the things that warm my heart the most, are watching my third and fourth year students helping the newer students problem
yes,
solve their way through issues.
yes,
And I feel like I've done my job when I can stand back
yes,
and start
exactly.
helping sort out other problems. And that, yeah, that,
You just see and we were having this discussion last week at school about just seeing, and I was having it with the students. I was like, do you guys, because I've had the same group of students, taught them in first year. I moved with them. Just things worked out that I had a class with them every year. And now I'm teaching them the third year design class with Winke and Paul normally teach that class. I'm just kind of shadowing them. Um, but it's the same group of students that I had last year, and it was, a lot of them are younger, so it was their first experience with designing and drawing, and they were petrified of drawing. And I was like, guys, nobody's judging. Like, just put your pen down, draw whatever comes to your mind, don't erase it, don't throw it out, keep it. You never know when it's going to come back. And then looking at them this year with their drawings that are flawless and they're just so perfectly thought out, like brooch backings are there, everything's there, everything looks great. And I told them, I was like, I feel like I've done my job when I see you guys not being petrified of drawing things and putting ideas down as designers and just like sitting with them. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
It's a great feeling.
Future goals.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and then also another thing that you said that really stood out for me was in Kashmir when you said that you stumbled upon the hand building workshop a few years back when I was in my third year or second year at George Brown. I went back to Iran and I took a few jewelry courses there, so I knew some of the people in the industry and whatnot. So, and we usually, when I would go back there, we would meet up for a coffee or whatever. So we met up and we were talking. And this was me realizing that I'm so spoiled and like, we call them first world problems. Like it really applied there. I was whining about how at school we didn't have a certain tubing that had required a certain wall thickness for setting. It was like two and blah blah blah. And for a second, I looked up and they were all looking at me like, "Oh my God, look at you, so spoiled." And I was like, "What? Like, like what's wrong? Why are you guys looking at me?" Like they were like, we don't have any. Like they don't have sheets, they don't have tubing, they don't have wire. They have to make everything themselves." And they also have only one solder, and I guess it's a medium solder. So there's no easy, because I was like, do you guys use easy or hard for this? And they were like, what are you talking about? We only have
Yeah.
one solder. And I was like, wait, how's that possible? How do you guys go for multiple solder joints? And they were like, well, we just, like have to be extra careful. And then every solder joint is already like the heat has raised the solder there. So we try to like use it. And it was mind blowing where I was like, oh my God, you guys are actually goldsmiths because I get my material here and I just cut it and solder it. But you guys have to literally make everything. Like you want zero point 0.5 sheet, you have to make it. You want 1.2, you have to make it. You want tubing, you have to make it. And I was like, oh my God, this is where, that sort of very close relationship with, and I think to a certain extent, just you being also a person that understands and gets nature and has your life kind of very involved in it. It's pretty much very similar in the terms of the old techniques and the old ways that we used to treat nature and the new ways and how we're kind of distancing ourselves away from it because it's the essence of like once you have to do all of this stuff from
Yeah.
scratch, then you really understand the material, the properties, the way it works. But then once you have access to a lot of things, you kind of often underestimate that
Yeah.
process that this material is just available to us. But a lot of people don't have that, and they have to come up with alternative ways or um, make new processes and stuff to get to where we can get faster or with less hassle. So
Yeah, we probably learn about half as much as we would if we had to go right from scratch and
yeah,
um in terms of material knowledge. And that actually, as you were speaking, it gave me a good idea for a project.
amazing,
So
great. That's
we're
awesome.
gonna get our shovels and we're gonna go dig some, find the gold.
That's wonderful. I love it. Great.
No,
No,
I
really.
don't think
This
I'd take
was,
it that far. It would take too long, but perhaps we could step back a
yes.
little bit further rather than buying everything and learn, going from scrap to finished objects sort of thing.
Yeah. No, really. It's you also gave me a lot of good ideas. So it's funny because after all of these interviews that I have, I get so many ideas and I just go down on my sketchbook and I write a whole bunch of things until next time when I get excited again. And then I go back and I'm like, oh my God, my notes from last time. I should do this. Summertime. I'm keeping them all for summertime.
Yeah.
Um, but honestly, thank you. This was very fascinating for me, and I'm hope for everybody else. Just hearing your story and how you've related everything together and sharing all that knowledge and beautiful work with us was very flattering. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you so much for inviting me to do this.
My pleasure. Anytime. And then once we're kind of having a backlog with editing the videos because I thought editing videos was so easy, but it's not. It's time consuming.
So hard.
Our other team member Andre is also helping me with the editing. So hopefully we'll have yours up before Christmas. So then you can show everybody what a great person and artist you are after that with this video. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody who joined us. I hope you all have a great Sunday evening. And yeah, join the next guest is going to be Karen Jones, and that's going to be October, I think 29th, but we'll announce it in our newsletter and we'll put it up on our social media. Again, Jamie, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Really. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.
You too.
Okay, bye
Bye.
bye. Bye.